Hello and welcome to another video about In Force to Heaven game by Vuca Simulations. Today I want to show you how cards work in this game. This game is not a CDG, a card-driven game, although the game uses a lot of cards, but those cards are used a bit differently than in many other games. Mostly those cards are references to some rules. They have minor influence on actions on the board, and the most cards in quantity, which are called the calendar deck, are going to be used along with the turn track as a placeholders for cards for the Allied offensive against Germany in Saar region, and most importantly for the Soviet offensive from the east. In this video I'm gonna just show you a bit how those cards work. I'm not going to make a full rules video. I'm gonna leave it for the basic tutorials. Right now, just a short overview. So there are a few types of cards. One that is going to be used frequently are going to be simple 8 cards with some rules references and some reminders about bridges and stuff like when do you get step losses in retreat. But those cards are hidden for now. The most important cards are separated into basically 6 separate decks. The first 3, actually 2, because the third is not a deck, are the Plan West cards, which are those ones, General Staff cards, one counter-offensive card, Polish counter-offensive, and then the main calendar deck. The work with this deck is going to be a lot easier with having your cards in the deck, the physical cards in the decks next to the game map. And 2 decks that work with calendar deck are the Soviet deck and the Allied offensive deck. In short, let's begin with the Plan West cards. There are only 6 of those, and those cards basically work as a reference that is going to be used when called upon. The first card is just introduction, what was the Plan West and how card is organized, and then all of the Plan West stage cards are divided into 2. The first part is regarding Plan West activation cheat, because in the procedure of Plan West activation, you need to check what are the mandatory actions or what are the limitations of the activation for the Polish player. And the second part of the card tells you when the current stage ends, because we're going to have next stages, which are historical, but you don't have to really memorize these cards or learn the rules about those cards in any way, because all of the content which is on the card or the cards of different stages, only one stage is active at the time. When to check what is written on this card is always called by the action. Like, for example, Plan West activation, perform movements to ensure at least steps of combat units in every Polish army are adjacent to German units on the map, and then perform some attacks. And this happens only when the Plan West cheat is drawn from the cup. The second part is called by the sequence of play, which is exactly right here. Subphase 3A, Polish staff, and we have step B, Plan West stage advance, check Plan West cards. And then we check prerequisites for the ending of the plan, and if it happens, we go to the next stage, and then situation can change a bit regarding the Plan West activation. The second card is also the second deck of cards. Also consists of 5 or 6 cards. It depends how divided are they going to be, and it is called the General Staff. The abbreviation of SG is not translated from Polish. It is abbreviation for Sztab Główny, SG. And this card is also used or read when called upon in exactly the same part of the turn, which is the step step A. Polish General Staff relocation check. You need to check SG card. And those cards are divided into 2 sections as well. The first one are the prerequisites for the General Staff relocation, and the second is exact procedure for the evacuation or relocation of the General Staff. General Staff is a very important part of this game. It is represented on the map by the counter of General Staff, and the General Staff has prepared evacuation path, which has to be historical because it makes no sense to work in any other way. For example, the first stage of evacuation is Brześć, and it was very well known by the Germans that Brześć is going to be the first relocation step, because Brześć had a secondary command post and stuff like communication and supply bases and stuff like this, and it was obvious that when the General Staff is going to escape, the next step is going to be Brześć. So this card is the stage of this card, let's call it the stage, is exactly where the General Staff counter is currently, and it's simply used when the sequence of play calls for it. Excuse me. So now we have the third card, and it is only a single card, which is a counter-offensive, and it is used only in the Grand Campaign scenario and in one campaign scenario which contains the part of the campaign in which the counter-offensive can be used. This is only a single card, and it basically contains a prerequisites and procedure how to start the counter-offensive for the Polish player. It will also have placeholders for 2 auxiliary Polish HQ counters, which will indicate which of Polish armies are designated for the counteroffensive. Basically, the Polish player has to be aware how this card works and check this card, and it changes a little some parts of command on the Polish side. So, in the campaign, historically, there were 2 counteroffensive, but one was planned. Well, it was more improvised than planned, but we can say that it was planned to some extent. And in this game, the whole point of this card is to keep the most important rules on this card, to have it handy. And the most important aspect of this card is that the Polish player decides where and when the counteroffensive will start. So it doesn't have to be exactly as historical. Then we have a calendar deck. Calendar deck consists of cards for every day from the calendar track, or the turn track, if you call it, which goes from September 1st to October 1st, but the cards go up to October 6th. Their art is supposed to look like the historical pocket calendar, like the small one with the separate pages for each day, and have the name day and the names of Polish names of days of the week. I don't know how to tell it in a more logic way, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. The main purpose of this deck is at first there are some events on those cards. Like we might, as I said before, it will be much easier to have it all in your hand with the real cards. We have some historical events and important time events that happened on those exact days. Some cards have some actions, like right here, German diversion in Bydgoszcz, roll 1d6 and put some shock counters. There are some events that are not really very important for the game, but they are really important for the whole context of this campaign. But most of the cards contain informations that are only there to just show you, for example, there's some event and there is a photo of some important figure from the time, their lifespan, and the date when such person died and what was the cause of it. So I decided not to include historical events in every card, because you can open like a historical calendar or simply open the history book and read all of those facts. Instead, I figured out that more important might be something like this, to include some symbols and some generals and some figures that were important for the campaign. Because what this deck is supposed to do is to be the placeholder for the Allied and Soviet decks. Let's flip all of those cards back. In the next video, I'm going to perform a full simulation of the campaign without playing the game, just using the cards, just so you can see how the Allied and Soviet offensives can progress during the game and possibly influence actions in the game. Well, Allied not so much, but Soviet of course, yes. Go. Yeah. So let's drag it right here. This is the Soviet deck, and here we have the Allied deck. And those decks contain much more important informations for the game, because they contain some actions, and they govern entry of Soviet army to the Polish territory. So, for example, first they are used only when called upon. Again, you don't have to really read or learn any rules of those cards, how those cards work, because it's simply flip the card, read the card, do this, do that. It's all in the cards, in the content of the cards. So, for example, the Allied and the Soviet offensive, the first card of Allied and Soviet offensive, comes into play when the Western Allies declare war. And it is also variable, and here we have it. Western Allies declare war on Third Reich, raise morale by 2, resolve 2 Soviet 1 cards and one Allied card. On those cards we have we have actions like, let's zoom in. So first one is the informational card, demarcation line, which explains and shows on the minimap where goes the demarcation line based on the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. And the second card, and this card is there to be kept to remember this, because it's gonna come important in the later stage of the game. And the second card starts to give you some actions to do. Take 3 Soviet 2 cards and place them on the top of the calendar cards of September 9th, 10th and 11th, and place the demarcation line card somewhere around the mouth to have it handy. So then we take all of the cards too, and we randomly place them on cards of 9th, 10th and 11th. We have 11th right here. Of course it's going to be one deck. I just placed it like here to be a little less fiddly. And let's pretend that we had... oh, come on. Let's pretend that it is now September 11th. Maybe those cards do not stack. I will need to check this. Anyway, let's pretend that we have September 11th and the previous card, when the turn marker entered September 9th. By the way, there was an idea to make it counters on the calendar deck, but ultimately it proved to be simply too cluttering for the turn track. And most importantly, with counters you cannot have informations. It would need rules references and stuff like this. It was absolutely, completely, disastrously fiddly. So I've decided to go on with the cards. So what are on those cards? We have, for example, no news from Moscow. So let's pretend it's September 9th and nothing happens. You discard, simply discard. Then we have the turn goes on, we play our battles and campaign and stuff happens on the map. And then we go to September 10th turn, Sunday. We flip the September 10th card. If on top of this card is any Allied or Soviet card, then we flip it too and resolve it. And for example, let's say that it is this one, and we have something like this. And by the way, this card was also no news from Moscow. So as you can see, variable nature of when the timing of Soviet advance is resolved by, for example, 3 cards of a particular stage, like in this case stage 2, and only one of those cards is exactly the card that speeds up the Soviet offensive. And then we have actions. As a result of Reich's diplomatic efforts, Molotov sends a note stating that USSR needs 2 more weeks for offensive preparations. Stalin hopes that the Wehrmacht will defeat the Polish army on its own. Then let's place the Soviet invasion 3 card on the calendar deck 14 days from the current deck. And if we check the card 3 is exactly the Soviet attack, but it's going to be already much later than the historical date. To shoot for the historical date, we have another procedure, which is randomly place cards of stage 4 and stage 5 on certain dates, and remove, if any, stage 2 offensive cards, which would be discard without any effect, would be still in the deck. We discard those cards, and this card goes off the deck, and then we have next stages. And in those stages there is much more interesting stuff happening, because on those cards we now have some conditions, whether the stage will the stage of the Soviet offensive will progress or not. For example, those are dependent from German advances beyond the demarcation line. This is where the demarcation line becomes important, and we need to check if at least 1 hex of Warszawa is under German control or Białystok is under German control. If not, discard. Then, if at least 1 hex of Warszawa or Brześć or the Narew line has been crossed by at least 1 German division unit, and the third card has different prerequisites to advance the stage. If so, then we take cards 6 and we shuffle them, we place them into the calendar deck. And the stage 5, which was as well already placed, is not dependent from German actions. Those are the Far Eastern actions, and we need to wait until the Khalkhin-Gol battle ends, and only then Stalin will be ready to go against Europe and invade Poland. So we have in parallel two different events that play out. And if the stage 4 progresses the Soviet offensive, then we need to wait when the Red Army is going to be ready to attack. If the Red Army is ready to attack, then the Soviet crossing happens earlier or later or in the same date as historical. If not, the German player will need to wait up to 2 weeks for the final Soviet offensive, which might really heavily influence what happens in Poland. And then we have German withdrawal, which also includes some rules that need to be followed by the German player. Basically, start to withdraw from Poland, at least from the eastern Poland, from beyond the demarcation line. Then we have some contextual information and some procedures how to prepare the Soviet offensive. And there are some changes to Polish victory conditions in case of campaign. So this is the full Soviet deck. And how this works, I will show you in the separate video, how this works in practice. Allied offensive deck works very similarly. Well, it works almost the same, but instead of some important actions, we mostly have contexts, historical contexts, to give you a little feel what the general staff and the Polish government felt. So, just like in the Soviet deck, it works the same. Stage 1 mandates to place stage 2 cards, where just like in the Soviet deck, two of them are only duds, where nothing happens, all really quiet on Western Front, and then the Tsar offensive begins, or at least the Polish general staff is told so. Then we have some good news and the offensive actually started, which will have a very minor impact on German units in Poland. And then we just progress the story to the end, up to the stage 6, where information comes to Poland that offensive is called off, which was way too late, because it might also have influenced a little Polish actions in Poland. So regarding all of those cards, going back to the calendar deck is supposed to work mostly as a placeholder for those cards, and also give you some interesting events and notes about history, about what happened outside of Poland, for example. And some cards contain just some generals and some basic information about them. So this is it. Those are cards in Force to Heaven. So we have Plan West cards that are used only with the Plan West activation cheat and only checked when the plan progresses, when the SOP calls for. We have General Staff deck, which shows you prerequisites for the General Staff relocation, but only when checked when SOP calls for it, and then evacuation procedure. We have a Polish counteroffensive card, which have prerequisites for the Polish player to start the counteroffensive and some rules regarding this counteroffensive. Calendar deck, which works mostly as a placeholder for the Soviet offensive cards, which are basically event cards, and Allied cards, which give you mostly the context. and have some really minor rules regarding them. Putting all of this together, the whole point is that it doesn't create any fiddliness in the game, in the most important part of the game, which is the game with the counters and the map. It goes like when SOP calls, check this. When SOP calls, check this. When the card tells you to do this, just do this. You don't have to really keep in mind any rules regarding those cards. So you might ask, are those cards even needed in the game? Well, in campaign, yes. In smaller scenarios, they are not used. In the campaign, it is a very important part of this game and a very important device to create a story, to tell you the full story of this campaign, which, as you might see, might not go exactly as historical. So with this, I'm going to end this video and invite you for my next video, where I will play out the calendar deck with the whole Soviet deck and the Allied deck, and we will see how the campaign progresses with the historical events. Thank you for watching.